He lived wide open, no secrets, no filters. But after Indian Larry died, they found a place he never mentioned. Locked, buried, waiting. Inside, machines that defied everything, and a final letter that changes the game. Watch till the end, because one of those bikes might have been meant for you. The key wasn't the hard part. Indian Larry didn't believe in locks. So why was this one bolted shut? He built his life on openness, on full throttle transparency. You didn't need an appointment to see him. You didn't need a press pass to watch him build. His shop in Brooklyn had been more shrine than storefront, an altar of flame-warped metal, grease-slicked concrete, and brutal honesty. Indian Larry didn't just build bikes. He welded belief into steel, and then he died. It was sudden, a stunt gone wrong, the kind of death that seemed both inevitable and impossible. For a man who lived on the edge of control and chaos, going out mid-ride almost felt scripted. But death didn't write the final chapter. What came after did. Weeks later, as his closest friends began gathering personal effects, they discovered a structure, unlisted, unmarked, and seemingly forgotten. Not his storefront, not his garage on display. This was something else. It sat outside the city, surrounded by chain link and rusted signage, bolted tight with a custom-welded door frame and a coded lock. No nameplate, no logo. Just one weld-etched phrase across the top beam. No tour. Someone whispered, "He never talked about this place." Another said, "Maybe we weren't supposed to know." But someone had the code. Someone cracked it. And when they did, everything changed. If that first chapter hit different, go ahead. Tap like and drop a comment below. What would you expect to find behind those locked doors? A treasure? A betrayal? We want to know. This story's just getting started and your voice helps fuel the ride. Dust and thunder. The shop didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. As the door creaked open, the scent hit them first. It wasn't decay. It wasn't dust. It was machine oil and old leather, the smell of torque wrenches left mid-job and gas tanks half-primed. The light was soft and golden, pouring in through grimy windows like it had waited years to return. And in that light, the outlines emerged. Shapes beneath tarps, shelves bending under the weight of forgotten tools, walls pinned with sketches that curled at the corners. There were no footsteps inside, only silence. A sacred silence, as if even the spiders knew not to spin too thickly in here. On a central workbench sat a pair of gloves, still shaped to the grip of a wrench. Next to them, a burned-out acetylene torch, upright, untouched. Every inch of the space told a story. In the far corner, a stack of hand-drawn blueprints were sealed in plastic, edges worn like they'd been thumbed through 1,000 times. On the west wall, black and white Polaroids showed frames mid-assembly. Larry himself half visible in the background, bandana wrapped tight, welding arc reflected in his goggles. It was more than a shop, it was a time capsule. But the real message hadn't been left on the walls. Because tucked beneath those tarps were machines that were never meant to roll, or maybe they were never meant to stop. If this story's hitting you deep, don't ride empty. Check the links below for rider-tested tools, gloves, and gear. No fluff, just what real builders actually use. Every click helps us tell more stories like this. The machines with no names, none of them had VIN numbers. Some didn't even have engines, but they had power. Under each tarp was a bike, or at least the bones of one. Some were nearly complete. Others were raw sketches in steel. Welds weren't polished. Frames didn't match known models. It was as if Larry had been designing a secret language through metal, one only he could speak. And now, someone else had to learn to read it. One frame was impossibly low, the rake extended at an angle that would have made traditional builders scoff. It had no visible seat, just a single leather strap stretched across the frame, stitched by hand. Another frame had twin gas tanks mounted vertically, with copper tubing looped around the backbone like exposed veins. There were no badges, no logos, no names. These weren't meant for the showroom, These were meant for war. Tools lined the walls like relics. A homemade hydraulic press cobbled together from scrap, a drill press with a custom foot trigger, an old refrigerator door repurposed as a welding shield, covered in flame stickers and half-burned notes. Every bike here defied convention, and that was the point. They weren't errors, they were protests. Because Indian Larry hadn't stopped building, he had just stopped listening. But in one corner of the shop, half shrouded in a canvas drop cloth, something different was waiting. The message in matte black. It wasn't just a bike, it was a letter. And it wasn't written to us. It sat away from the others. Smaller. Simpler. No chrome, no flame job, matte black tank, scuffed steel frame, narrow front forks, no visible branding. Nothing to catch the eye except its restraint. It wasn't screaming, it was whispering. This wasn't a bike made for a crowd, it was made for one rider. Taped across the tank was a strip of masking tape. In black marker, 3 words. For when she's ready. It was the kind of phrase that could stop a conversation mid-sentence. No one spoke, no one moved. The drop cloth still dangled from the side of the frame like a shroud. There were papers beneath it, loose sketches, a parts list, and a sealed envelope. Inside the envelope, a letter, addressed not to Harley Davidson, not to his fans, not even to his crew, but to his granddaughter. This bike is built for freedom, it read. It's light, it's fast, it's true. Don't let anyone tell you what it should be. Ride it the way it wants to be ridden. The signature was simple. Grandpa. That's when the room shifted. The shop wasn't a museum, it wasn't a lab, it wasn't a rebellion. It was a message, a handoff, a challenge. And that matte black bike? It wasn't finished. It was waiting. But deeper in the shop, behind a cracked tool cabinet, the next surprise was already rusting in silence. The bike with teeth. The first bike they uncovered had a bayonet welded to the forks. It wasn't metaphorical. It wasn't symbolic. It was real steel, real sharp, and welded clean, like it belonged there. The frame was raw, jagged in places, with scorched edges and no attempt at polish. There were no foot pegs, no seat, just a strip of weathered canvas bolted to the spine. Some might have called it a death trap, but Larry would have called it a statement. It looked like it belonged in a war zone, not a showroom. There were gas canisters mounted backward, crossbars etched with tally marks, and a shattered headlamp hanging like a bruised eye. One wheel had teeth, not real ones, but forged spikes cut into the rim like a buzzsaw. The tires were flat. The chain was still greased. It wasn't a bike anyone would ride, but it was a bike no one could ignore. One of the crew whispered, "Why would he build this?" The answer was in the welds. It wasn't designed to run. It was designed to last. A bunker bike. A machine for a world after the world. And it made them wonder. What was Larry preparing for? Because if this was the first thing buried in the back, then the rest might not just be forgotten. They might have been hidden on purpose. And what they discovered next would make that theory harder to ignore. What the tape said. He didn't write a memoir, but he left recordings. The box was old, a plastic shoebox, melted slightly on one side like it had sat too close to a welding torch. Inside, 6 cassette tapes, unlabeled except for a piece of duct tape on top that read, "No BS." They found an old player in the corner, half buried beneath rusted chain links and a can of WD-40. They hit play. The voice that came through was tired but clear. It was Larry, alone, talking to no one. Not polished, not rehearsed, just raw stream of consciousness. He spoke about the industry, about betrayal, about the suits who tried to sell his soul one branded bolt at a time. "They want chrome," he said on one tape. "Shiny sells, but the soul's in the dirt." He talked about the bikes he never finished, about design meetings where they told him his geometry was bad optics, about the night he walked out of a corporate dinner because someone called his work off-brand. On one tape, there was silence for nearly a minute. Then, If this tape's ever playing, I'm probably already dead. And if you're the one who found it, don't let them polish over me, you hear? It wasn't an autobiography. It was a confession. But if the tapes told the truth about what Larry fought, the sketches they found next showed what he dreamed. The wall behind the wall. He drew a future the company never dared touch. Behind the main workbench was a plywood wall. Looked ordinary enough. But when they unscrewed it, 4 bolts, all stripped, they found something that shouldn't have existed. Another wall, covered top to bottom in pinned sketches, blueprints, and technical schematics. It was Larry's secret design vault, and it was decades ahead of its time. There were modular frames that could swap powertrains in minutes, drawings of bikes with solar assist panels. One design was a full electric chopper with a beltless drive and regenerative brakes, dated 2001. Another was a hybrid flat tracker built for dirt and street, labeled Livewire Proto Zero. These weren't ideas he pitched. These were ideas they rejected. In the margins of one drawing, he'd written, "They won't build it, so I will." Another had just one phrase in red, "Keep this one quiet." It was clear now. Larry hadn't just been ahead of the curve, he'd built the damn curve. And when the industry wouldn't follow, he didn't slow down. He just hid the road he was taking. These weren't fantasies, they were blueprints, and some were halfway built. But tucked in the corner of the fuse box, under a napkin stained with grease, was the simplest thing of all, and the most dangerous. The note with no name, pinned to the fuse box under a napkin, for whoever still gives a damn. That was all it said on the outside. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable, Larry's. Underneath the napkin was a folded sheet of yellow paper taped to the box with a rusted thumbtack. No envelope, no address, just a letter. It wasn't signed, it wasn't dated, but it wasn't vague. It read, "Whoever finds this, I'm guessing you care enough to keep looking. Maybe you're a builder, maybe you're just tired of lies. Either way, don't ask permission. You don't need it. The blueprints are real. The parts are here. The rest is instinct. Build something honest, then write it. That's the only thing I ever meant." There was a postscript, a single line in all caps. "Do not sell this place." They looked at each other. No one said anything. The room wasn't silent. It was charged. Larry hadn't just left tools and bikes and ideas. He'd left a challenge, an invitation. This wasn't a legacy he wanted protected. It was one he wanted tested. And someone, somewhere, was already getting ready to take that test. When the lawyers showed up, they came with clipboards and left with evidence bags. Within 2 weeks of Larry's passing, the paperwork hit harder than the grief. Attorneys representing the estate, the brand, and at least 2 private collectors arrived at the hidden workshop wearing polished shoes and fake reverence. They spoke in terms like asset inventory and intellectual property recovery. But what they were really doing was claiming territory. Suddenly, everything had a value. Not meaning, value. One lawyer pointed at an unfinished frame and asked, "Was this commissioned while he was under contract?" Another snapped photos of blueprints. One collector's representative whispered that Larry had accepted a deposit in 2006. No receipt, of course, but insisted the bike was his. The workshop wasn't sacred anymore, it was evidence. At the heart of the dispute was a brutal question. Where did Larry the man end and Larry the brand begin? Did Harley-Davidson own anything he touched post-retirement? Were the tools his personal property or corporate residue? And what about the designs that never went public? Were they protected? Were they even legal? One family member tried to protest. Another stayed quiet. The legal team just kept circling, turning grease-stained genius into cataloged items. But what they didn't count on was that someone had already memorized everything they were trying to claim, and that someone had a torch of his own to carry. The boy who remembered. He wasn't a mechanic. He was a sponge. Most people barely noticed the kid. He had started coming to the shop when he was 15. No official job, no pay, just swept the floors, handed over tools, and listened. Indian Larry called him Mouse. Said he was too quiet to scare the dust. But Mouse had been watching. every building, every trick, every weld pattern. And now he was 21, older, not louder, but he'd never stopped remembering. After Larry died, Mouse disappeared until the day a new Instagram account showed up. No name, no tags, just one photo. A raw frame, unmistakably Larry's geometry. Down to the fork angle, the weld seams, the tension in the swing arm. A caption. For the one who couldn't finish it. Then came another, and another. Full builds, no logos, no sponsors, just pure metal. The kind Larry would have respected. That's when the estate's lawyers got involved again. They claimed copyright infringement, trade theft, violation of brand identity, but Mouse didn't care. He wasn't building to sell, he was building to speak. He'd memorized every move Larry made, and now he was writing in that same steel dialect. He didn't want a platform. He didn't want credit. He wanted the story finished. But Mouse wasn't the only one building in silence. The writers in the dark. The blueprints leaked, and then came the night builds. No one knows who leaked them. Maybe it was Mouse. Maybe it was someone from inside the family. But once Larry's hidden designs hit the web, scanned, compressed, re-uploaded 100 times over, something changed in the chopper world. Shops that had gone silent started buzzing again. Small garages in Mississippi, backyard builders in Nevada, a collective in Belfast. They didn't post tutorials, they didn't ask permission, they just started building again using Larry's Ghost Sketch geometry as a foundation. Some called it an open-source rebellion. Others just called it therapy. The bikes weren't showroom ready, some were downright dangerous, but they had life, they had attitude. One mechanic said, "It's like riding something honest again." The night builds started showing up at underground meetups. No branding, no patches, no sponsors, just metal, gasoline, and a kind of reverence that didn't need marketing. Word got around that Larry's spirit was back, and it didn't belong to a company. It belonged to everyone who still cared enough to bleed for the ride. The estate tried to issue takedown requests. They failed, because the internet doesn't forget, and real builders don't stop. But when someone tried to sell Larry's bikes at auction, they found out the community could do more than build. The auction that backfired. They tried to sell rebellion. What they got was a riot. It was framed as a celebration, a tribute auction, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to own pieces from Larry's legendary workshop. The invitation-only event promised exclusivity. Heritage. Bidding started at $100,000, but what they didn't expect was the noise. Thousands of bikers, collectors, and fans from all over the country protested. Letters poured in, forums erupted. A petition to block the auction hit 75,000 signatures in under 3 days. One ex-racer flew in just to scream at the event organizers, "You don't auction off soul." The day of the auction, the venue was surrounded by hundreds of riders, many wearing nothing but denim and rage. Engines revved, protesters lined the sidewalks. Some bikers sat in silence, holding signs made of old license plates. Others carried cardboard cutouts of Larry's silhouette. Inside, the bidding never really got started. One by one, the lots were pulled. The auctioneer never raised his hammer. The crowd never sat down. The auction was canceled by the end of the hour, but not before someone noticed that one bike, just one, was missing from the floor. It hadn't been listed, it hadn't been photographed, and nobody saw who took it. What happened next would move the fight from the streets into the hands of the government itself. The call from Washington. They weren't worried about the bikes, they were worried about the ideas. The call came quietly, routed through 3 layers of legal counsel. A representative from the Department of Transportation wanted a private conversation, not about inheritance, not about branding, but about a handful of machines found inside Indian Larry's hidden shop. Notably, a pair of sketches involving modular battery architecture and adaptive braking systems. Nothing that looked threatening at first glance, until someone from the tech division flagged it. Larry, it turned out, had designed systems far ahead of federal testing standards. One prototype hinted at self-adjusting geometry. Another mimicked ride behavior and adjusted torque response based on sensor input. The government didn't fear a rogue chopper, They feared a disruption to classification laws. If Larry's concepts worked, entire categories of vehicle regulation would need rewriting. It wasn't about safety. It was about control. And beneath it all was a deeper concern. If independent builders could produce high-performance modular EVs without institutional backing, what did that mean for national infrastructure? For security? For legacy manufacturers tied to political capital? The call ended with a request wrapped in polite phrasing: access, documentation. Perhaps one official hinted even temporary seizure for research purposes. But the estate had just learned to say no, and corporate America wasn't about to take that lying down. The blueprint they copied anyway. Harley said he was outdated. Then they built his bike. When the Livewire division released its new flagship electric motorcycle, the press called it a leap forward. Lightweight, minimalist, purpose-built. But the few who had seen Larry's final sketches felt an instant shock of déjà vu. The angles, the battery cage, even the fender lines. It was his. Maybe not a one-to-one copy, but close enough to recognize the ghost in the geometry. No citation, no acknowledgement, just chrome and marketing. Internal documents leaked weeks later. An engineer from Larry's former circle had been hired by Harley 2 years prior. Their records showed the team had access to recovered sketches through the legal proceedings. They had argued in court that the designs were non-viable, but that didn't stop them from reverse engineering them in secret. When asked, Harley denied it, called the resemblance aesthetic coincidence. But for those who knew Larry's design language, it wasn't a coincidence. It was theft. Theft of style. Theft of soul. The very systems the company once labeled impractical were now their selling points. Lightweight, modular, forward-leaning, and not a whisper of his name attached. Larry didn't live to see it, but his fingerprints were everywhere. And they weren't just on bikes anymore. The Brotherhood with no patch. They don't wear vests. They wear grease. Something strange started happening across garages in cities no one ever visits. Not just in America, but in places like Queensland, Glasgow, and Osaka. Builders, not brands. Machines that didn't match spec but rode like lightning. Frames with uneven welds but perfect weight distribution. A new aesthetic was forming, not polished, not Instagram filtered, but deeply aggressively honest. And they all knew the name, Larry. Only this wasn't a fan club. There were no patches, no chapters, no merchandise. They didn't host rallies or publish manifestos, but they showed up for each other. If you broke down in Berlin, someone in Tucson would mail the part. If you needed torque specs for a steel tail Larry once drew on a napkin, someone from Buenos Aires would find it and translate it by hand. They didn't need validation. They needed steel. And they called themselves, if they called themselves anything, the Brotherhood with no patch. They didn't worship Larry. They emulated his defiance, his refusal to let legacy be polished into product, his insistence that rebellion wasn't fashion, it was craft. In a world being algorithmically compressed, they were expanding the language of the road again. But one bike had never joined them, and it was never supposed to. If you've made it this far, you're not just watching, you're riding with us. Hit subscribe. These aren't just stories, they're blueprints for something bigger. More machines, more truths, and the legacies they never wanted told. Join us because the road ahead, it's only getting louder. The bike that never rode. Near the back, under canvas, sat his last build. Untouched, waiting. It wasn't hidden, just ignored, like something too sacred to touch. The bike didn't have chrome, didn't even have paint. The tank was raw steel, still bearing the fingerprints of whoever last wiped it down, probably Larry himself. The tires were inflated, but there was no battery, no key. A note, folded and greased, was wedged between the bars. It read, "For the last ride." Family members debated its meaning. Was it built for a funeral procession? Was it meant for Larry's final personal ride, one he never took? Or was it for someone else entirely, someone he never had the chance to meet? Nobody started it. Nobody dared. One visitor whispered it should be sealed in glass. Another said it should be buried. But the quietest voice in the room said what no one wanted to hear. It was never meant to be stationary. Maybe it was never meant for wheels. Maybe it was never meant for sale. Maybe it was just a message, forged in silence. A challenge. Larry didn't build answers. He built invitations. To build, to defy, to ride. And that final machine, unridden, unclaimed, still waiting in a workshop now watched by the world, wasn't a goodbye. It was a starting line. What Indy and Larry left behind wasn't a collection. It was a challenge, a code, a reminder that the soul of a machine isn't in its chrome. It's in the hands that built it. If this story moved you, even just a little, don't let it fade when the video ends. Hit that subscribe button because we're not done. There are more garages like this, more builders the world forgot, and more legacies corporate hands tried to erase. But if we keep digging, if we keep writing, they can't bury them all. Drop a comment below. Tell us which bike hit you hardest, which detail made you pause, which moment felt like it was meant for you. Because this is more than content. This is history, still rumbling under the surface. And you just found the key. Let's ride forward, together.